Reparations for building this nation. Lynching and burning castration. Selling children, family separation. Right now, time for reparations. Millions of slave ships landed, whipped, chained, and branded. 300 years of free labor. We're asking for no reparations. Time to pay. Right now, time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, reparations. Reparations for reconstruction. Racism is a destruction. Segregation, Jim Crow, corruption. Right now, time for reparations. Reparations for the Constitution. Said we were 3/5 human. Reparations are overdue. 48 years overdue. Reparations. Time for reparations. Time for reparations. Time for reparations. Right now, time for reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Pay up. Right now, reparations. Pay up, time to pay up. Right now, time for reparations. Time for
My mic is muted. Hold on. Do you hear me now? I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarland. Thanks to all of you for being here. And thanks to our local distribution network, McFarland Media Interest, our dashboard, and also thanks to the National Black Press of America, NNPA. We're streaming this program at Black Press USA, a conversation that's local that we believe has significance to everybody everywhere. I'm glad to continue our regular Monday afternoon session, reaching and connecting with candidates for office in the city of Minneapolis and also in St. Paul. And as always, it's an open-ended conversation. Our mission is to bring these voices forward. We want you, our viewers on Facebook, our listeners, to have a relationship with those who serve you and who want to serve you in public office. So we invite these candidates to show up unscripted and to each week present their vision, their version of reality and opportunity for you, the voter, the consumer. So I'm pleased to have, I see Council Member Jeremiah Elliston is here, who is the incumbent for 5th Ward, which is where I live. And one of his opponents, Victor Martinez, is here, who also resides here in North Minneapolis. I want to acknowledge my co-host, my friends and colleagues over at Harrison Neighborhood Council, Diana Hawkins, and also, I said Harrison again, Hawthorne. Hawthorne, thanks for correcting me. I'm watching Hawthorne Neighborhood Council. Diana Hawkins and Andrew Bonoff and Dee Phillips all are here. Thank you all for being here. Acknowledge also two candidates, Alicia Gibson and Mickey Moore, and they'll describe their interests, their campaigns, and my colleague reporter for this event, Brenda Lyle Gray. So thank you all for being here. And I started off, and I'll be using for the next several weeks probably, this music from Sounds of Blackness, Time for Reparations. And reparations are on my mind. So I'm going to start with that asking Jeremiah, first of all, what comes to mind, Jeremiah, when you hear that music and the call in our community, time for reparations? And that's only a question of departure. Jeremiah and other members, take the conversation wherever you want it to go. My objective here is that you have space and a place to say what's on your mind. The last thing I'll say is that this is not a gotcha program. I have no interest in surprising or springing surprises on each of you, but I want everybody to feel free to say what's genuinely on their mind, in their hearts, and things that they want each other and the community and the world to know. So that's kind of the parameter. Jeremiah, good afternoon. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you for having me on the show. When I think about reparations, this is a topic of discussion. It's been a part of my life and in my family for ever since I was born. Right. I really think it's important for us to think about reparations not only as a dollar amount, although it should be that, but also reparations is synonymous with the term remedy, right? If someone has been damaged, if someone has been harmed, especially by another, there needs to be some form of remedy, whether in the form of medicine and also in the form of healing, right? In the form of emotional remedy as well. For me, reparations is about a history of inequity that needs to be addressed and that has never quite been addressed since we've gotten on slavery and Reconstruction and Jim Crow. We've never had reparations for the damage that was done. And so I actually use reparations, the framework of reparations, which is, remedy. How do we create healing and prosperity in our community as a framework for how I govern? And so I actually had a big smile on my face as the song was playing because it's just been on my mind. And I've also been thinking a lot about a couple of both the national conversation around HR 40, which the folks that don't know is a congressional bill where Congress is looking to study reparations in some form. What could it look like? We've never really vetted that question. What could reparations look like? We've always just assumed the cost is too high. We can never pay it. Let's move on. But HR 40 says, no, there's a way that we could possibly calculate this, and maybe we should if we want to start moving closer and closer to a real conversation around reparations. And I also think about some local efforts that have been tried. Evanston, Illinois, as a city, trying to it's seeking to have municipal reparations. And once you take a framework like reparations and you turn it through the municipal government grinder, it doesn't look all that pretty. But I really commend what Evanston is trying to do, and it's a case study that I'm studying pretty strongly as I think about, what could a reparations framework look like for us here locally in Minneapolis. So I'll leave it there.
Well, before I switch it over to the next person, I wanted you to take, and each candidate, and particularly the incumbents, Jeremiah, to take a minute to remind people what you feel your accomplishments have been. What are you running on? I think as often as not, and I say this both as a point of information, but also as a point of criticism, so take it that way, that too often our leaders don't take the energy and the time to report out even good things that they are doing. So I'm saying this in the spirit that I hope your presence here and this platform is one of many that you can continue to use to make sure people are up to speed with you as you try to deliver. So take a minute to talk about what you feel your deliverables have been and what you're still working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one thing that I've done better than anyone before me, quite frankly, and I think I'll continue to do great at, is improving the economic conditions and the housing conditions of people in North Minneapolis. I've fought really hard when it comes to housing stability, in every corner of our ward. I've worked to build affordable housing along the river when people thought that should be relegated to just luxury housing. I've worked to build affordable housing in North Loop when people kind of associate North Loop with luxury housing. I've worked to build improved housing infrastructure along Olson Highway and throughout the ward. And as it has become more expensive to live in the city, I have just doubled down on my efforts to make sure that Northsiders have a place that they can afford, a dignified place that they can afford. I've also gone after landlords harder than I think anyone else in the city. I've changed how we do regulation in our city, housing regulation, so that we're still holding landlords accountable, but also not ousting the tenant, not putting that tenant out on the street. That's the renter policy that really has allowed us to conduct what's called a lot of tenant remedy actions. This is basically a legal tool that allows tenants to take action against their landlord in order to improve the conditions of their housing in a way that doesn't oust the tenant themselves. And I've worked on a number of tenant protections that would increase access to housing, that increases our ability to get to not only for renters to rent, but also for folks to get access to affordable home ownership. And then on the economic development front, I worked to create the Commercial Property Development Fund. When you see buildings going up online like 927 Broadway, you can 6th Avenue Eatery is now looking at a third location. And so businesses like Tri Construction, things like Baldwin Square, businesses like this are all that are owned by Northside residents, by Ward 5 residents. Whereas owning commercial property was out of reach prior to my time being in office, the creation of the Commercial Property Development Fund is all of a sudden making it attainable. And so I think we're going to see in a short amount of time, folks in our community being able to own the commercial space, not only the housing, but owning the commercial space, which of course is going to put us in the driver's seat a little bit more when it comes to determining the look and shape and destiny of our neighborhood. So, I'll talk about those things, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of other topics, especially with regards to how we're keeping each other safe in our community, how making sure that we're not subjecting Northsiders to police violence, or gun violence. Those are all things I'm happy to talk about. But this is the work that I've been doing in my office, and just making the office more accessible and better.
Great, thank you. One last question. Driving up and down West Broadway recently on the north side of West Broadway, a lot of land, a lot of lots being dug up and prepared. What's going on there? I don't know. What's happening? Like 5 or 6, it's like 4 or 5 blocks, right? Together, all being redeveloped.
Yeah. So you've got, a couple of housing developments. I'm like totally, blanking on the name of each project. But you've got the curve finally. That project started before my time in office, and I think they're finally breaking ground on the Broadway Curve Phase 2. Satori Housing, which is another housing development that's going to be, that is being led by a Northside resident, is going to be something that's coming online here pretty quickly. Again, 927 is one of those buildings, and those guys that's Tri Construction, and those guys have an option on the building across the street as well I think that's 1001 or 1011 West Broadway. And so a lot going on West Broadway for sure. And I think that, with the creation of the Commercial Property Development Fund, and more importantly, it's one thing to have the money, but if the program is not designed for its local ownership, and Northside business owners, then it could, a gentrifying effect. But instead, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing folks from the community being able to own and operate down the corridor.
Thank you, Jeremiah Allison. Victor Martinez, how you doing, my friend? Unmute.
Perdón, estamos muy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú cómo estás?
Estoy bien. Bien, gracias por estar aquí otra vez y bienvenido. Favor de empezar hablando de esta consideración de reparaciones. ¿Qué piensas?
Yeah, I agree with Jeremiah. I mean, the imagery of the video that we played is very powerful. Very just really shocks your system and lets you know like these things happen. This is real. The pain is real. The hurt is real. The injustice is real. And so I think that's my first impression for sure. And looking at ways to really bring justice to the history. I mean, it wasn't too long ago, when a lot of these injustices happen. And so I'm definitely on board with what Jeremiah said, and I think a lot of us are here as well.
Okay, so what do you think, and how can reparations take place for the families that were uh, enslaved, for the descendants of the enslaved? What do you think about that? I mean,
Yeah.
how do you make that? That's a philosophical question on the one hand, but how do you make it real and practical for men and women who walk around and who walk through systems that both were created by and sustained by, and they're supported by the actual and the legacy of institutional, uh, uh, enslavement, slavery? What do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is I believe that knowing our history, where we come from, the struggles that our ancestors went through, is really a beginning. Because I think that sometimes when when people are erased of their history, oftentimes it leaves a void in a person's life. And I think that, going back in our history and figuring out what happened to our ancestors, what happened to our great great grandmother, what happened to them, and the injustices that they went through, that's first and very important, because we have a lot of young people in our community that really feel lost, that their identity, they feel like they have no identity. They feel like whatever the street says they are, what their worth is, what it is. And so I think really finding out our history, connecting with our grandparents, those that are still around, and figuring out like what is the injustices that have happened to your life, and figuring out what does that mean to you, and how do you articulate that in the public square? How do you share how that makes you feel, and what do you want to see? What do you think is right to bring justice to that situation? So it is philosophical. It's pretty deep as well, but I think that's where we got to start, because I've met a lot of young people that are really struggling in our community right now. North Minneapolis, as I said before, has the highest concentration of young people probably in the state of Minnesota. And these young people that are struggling right now in our community are the ones that really feel lost. And I think we need to be able to empower them and resource them in incredible ways. And but again, finding your history, knowing your history, it's getting us halfway there, because that brings dignity, that brings justice into your mindset and your frame of thinking in terms of the community.
What are your thoughts on the outcome of the recent endorsement convention? You and Jeremiah and others were pitted in contest, and you came out ahead. Talk about that. And
absolutely.
What it for you, to you?
Yeah, I'm brand new to this thing, and so it might mean more to some people than others. I just know, and I appreciate Jeremiah. He said it in an article, I believe. He said, the endorsement process is a sign of who works the hardest. And I've told every candidate in this ward that nobody will outwork me. I'm really just blessed in a situation where I could really dedicate a lot of time to this, and I really care about this issue. And I believe I've now talked to over 700 people in this ward in the last 6 months. I kid you not. And I've talked to all types of folks, people that are lifelong DFLers, people that are brand new into the system. 20% of the delegates that voted for me are Latinos, first-time voters in this community that have never been reached out to, that have never been engaged. And so, but then I got lifetime DFLers that just want a new direction in our ward. And I think that reflected very well. Reached out to them. They asked me questions. I met them one-on-one. And I think that's what it shows. And now that I've talked to this many people in our ward, the ward is ready to move on in a different direction, because what sabotages the development, which I appreciate what the work that the incumbent has done on Broadway, but what sabotages all development in our community, it's the fact that safety and crime isn't curbed or isn't brought down. Last week we had another lady killed on Broadway in Lindale. The week before that, we had a young man get killed in the parking lot of Shiloh Temple. I mean, every single week you get someone killed or shot, and this is not normal. I mean, I've talked to people in the community. They're like, Victor, we avoid Broadway for our life. Like, nobody goes there. People in the community that have money, that have resources to spend in our community, don't shop here, because all of the development, everything that's coming in on Broadway becomes sabotaged when these things don't get under control. I mean, you got businesses replacing the windows every 6 months. Some of them don't even want to replace them anymore because they're like, it costs too much. I'm getting out of here. And so that's huge for me. And I think that that's what's resonating in the community. If we can't control crime, I mean, I have families telling me, Victor, I don't even let my kids outside on the jump up and down on the trampoline anymore. And so who wants to live like that, you know? And a lot of people are moving out. We talk about gentrification and people leaving the community. Well, guess what? Right now, we're probably speeding up gentrification because people that have been here 15, 20 years are like, you know what? I just can't anymore. I can't do this anymore. And so I think that we need to address that, and we need to really make sure that that's our number one priority in our community, is the safety of our families, our children, our businesses, because if we don't have safety, it sabotages everything else.
So how do you square this whole notion of gentrification? Number one, if we say to each other that people are afraid to be here and they're moving out, but gentrification implies that somebody's willing to move in where somebody has moved out. How does that work? What's the equation there?
Yeah,
how can people who are here feel unsafe, but people who may come feel safe? What's the difference, and how does that happen?
Yeah, so I'll clear two things. Gentrification is one thing, and displacement is another, right? Displacement of people that want to stay here and be here. I think that's an issue that we need to make sure that people that live here can stay here, could afford to stay here, and feel safe to stay here. But what I would say is right on the corner of my block, just a year and a half ago, we had a property that went for sale for $350,000. Everybody was shocked on the block. But the lady, she didn't last a year. We had a huge drive-by where two cars were going at each other, all in Williard Hay. It woke up half the community. 911 didn't pick up. And she just got scared. She was like, I'm done. She's out of here. Yeah, she put the house on the market, and within 3 weeks, it got sold again. So it's an interesting thing what's happening. Obviously, I prefer people not to be leaving because they're afraid for their families and their homes. But it's a weird development that's happening where people are leaving in big amounts, in big droves, but then other people are coming in, which is causing that displacement. Is causing people that want to stay here not able to be here anymore.
You were shaking your head, Jeremiah. What were you responding to?
Displacement and gentrification are not different things. Displacement is a part of gentrification. There's the physical displacement, but there's also a cultural displacement. There's also, there's a lot that goes into gentrification. And the chief question around gentrification is, who benefits from the improvements being made to your neighborhood? If it's the people who have always lived there, then that's your answer. And if it's not, and if it's only the new people who come in, then that's gentrification, right? I also think it's really important to just acknowledge what the truth is. The truth is that people aren't leaving the city in force. Minneapolis is a destination that people want to live. North Minneapolis is a beautiful community, and yes, we are experiencing a gun violence in our community, right, our city. But we need to be able to address the root causes of why that's happening, and not make up stories about why it's happening. Because if we make up stories about why the gun violence is happening in order to win elections, then it means that it puts us in a weak position to actually address that violence. A representative from downtown, I'm going to forget her name, but she was quoted the other day talking about how are you going to attract people back to downtown Minneapolis, with all of that's going on, and you're trying to pick back up the tourism issue and all of that. And the direct quote was, "We're in the same boat as everybody else." And you know what? That's actually the truth. Every single city has seen an increase in gun violence. Every single city is dealing with people being out of work, people being youth needing things to do. Minneapolis, we are experiencing those things, but we're not in a unique position, which means that we can be learning from our neighbors, we can be learning from the past, and addressing this crisis. If we're willing to tell the truth, we can address this crisis. And that's what I'm about. Making sure that we can use the American Rescue Plan dollars that we're going to be receiving to invest in our youth. Making sure we can double down on our efforts to stabilize housing. Houses in North Minneapolis, housing all across our city is very attractive to people outside of the city. And people do want to live in Minneapolis right now. And people want to live in North Minneapolis right now. And that's the truth. And so I don't want to hear this message of despair that Northsiders are just so weak-willed and Northsiders, lack, moral fortitude and Northsiders are just fleeing in droves from their neighbors and that they're terrified of their neighbors. We're going to together work to address the gun violence crisis that we but this message of despair, when it comes to this story of despair, when it comes to the North Side, it's an old story. People rejected that the year I got elected. I think that my opponents want to reconjure. They want to bring this story of despair back in order to tell convenient stories about why we're facing the tragedies we're facing. But the truth is that if we tell that story, we're going to put ourselves in a worse position to address the problem.
Let me bring other candidates in. We'll come back to you, Victor, to respond. Thank you, Jeremiah. Alicia Gibson, how are you, my friend? Good to see you again. And I'll start with you, and Mickey, you can get queued up. Start point of departure only with reflections on reparations, maybe reflections on Juneteenth, but then take it where you want to go, even inside the current conversation or beyond.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So for those of you who have not watched before, I'm Alicia Gibson. I am running for the Ward 10 City Council seat here in Minneapolis. And I'm really running a campaign to bring what I say the three forms of justice that we really need here in the city, which is restorative justice, economic justice, and environmental justice. This is a campaign that is about uniting our neighbors around a shared vision. I've spoken, like Victor, to hundreds and hundreds of people in Ward 10, and the things that unite us, the ideas we have, the care we have for our neighbors is actually, the main theme. The one thing that people tell me about is how they want to take care of each other. And so I want us to empower each other to do that and to unify around that, to find the most, to build consensus so that we are not spinning off into the most divisive ways forward, but the most unifying ways forward. I am so excited that we are talking about reparations. Mr. McFarland, you and I have been talking about we talked around the topic of reparations since the first time I've been on the show, and I've had the very good fortune to be on here a number of times. Reparations has been one of the main components of my economic justice platform since day one. As you and I have talked about, I am Japanese American, and this is, I have a PhD in comparative literature and cultural studies, and one of the main research topics for my work was to actually piece together the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the internment of Japanese Americans in concentration camps. And part of that story of the Japanese Americans is an awful Supreme Court case, Korematsu, which legalized the concentration camps in the United States, which was actually law that is still that is on the books and has been used to imprison people indefinitely at Guantanamo Bay. But then another part of that story is that that Congress did pass reparations law. And so there were some reparations giving to families. It was a very small amount. As Council Member Jeremiah Ellison brought up, when we start actually getting into the work of a reparation, it's going to get really messy. Communities are not united on what reparations mean. Communities are not united necessarily on how much they would want for reparations, determining how that system would work out. These are going to be areas of conflict, and we can't run away from conflict. We have to be committed to working through and with conflict in loving, compassionate ways. And one of the ideas that I have brought forward, just an idea that is always open to, the communities that matter, especially the most impacted, to have the most say on, which would not be me. But one of the ideas that I bring forward for a really practical, because you said we have the idea of it, and then we've got it, how are we going to do it? Municipal, as Council Member Ellison brought up, doing it on the municipal level is a lot more complicated in many ways than doing it at the federal level, because in order for us to come up with a system that is going to pass judicial scrutiny, so that means that the court, somebody won't sue us, because believe me, there will be groups that sue us, cannot be overturned in the courts. So I do have a law degree, so this is something that I think about quite a bit. How do we make change that we can support and that will stick, right? So what we're going to have to do is tie reparations to specific harm that has occurred in our city, that we can tie to laws, to policies at a municipal level. And one of the areas where I think we can do that is housing. I think housing discrimination, we have a very large evidentiary base so that we would be able to, I think, create a bulletproof reparations system around that. We also have as Diana is a fellow member of the neighborhood association and works hard, we have an amazing neighborhood association system. I have lived in a number of different cities as an adult and tried to, be a good citizen and operate at the city level. And there's really no city that has a neighborhood system like what we have. We have, for the people who don't know, we have a neighborhood funding system where neighborhoods, many years ago when there was a lot of flight out of the city, we created a a kind of loan program system to encourage people to buy in the city, to maintain houses. There are small loans, maximum would be 10,000. It's much more typical to have something closer to 5,000. So one of the ideas that I've had is, what if we could do kind of a housing reparation system where, especially in areas that were, redlined, and in places where we can really have that evidentiary base of discrimination, we create a system where neighborhoods, and it means people like us, just everyday people, can participate in giving money to these marginalized members of marginalized communities so they can buy homes. Because home ownership in this country still is one of the number one ways that middle class people build any kind of wealth, especially generational wealth. And when you look at the numbers, marginalized communities, and an individual from a African American community, they start out $10,000 behind in the down payment system for buying homes. And that checks out, because my dad, a social worker, worked 3 jobs, saved his money to give his money to his kids. And the amount of money that he was able to give me, he came from nothing, but he worked hard, was $10,000. That's a small amount, but it makes a really big difference when you're starting out and you want to buy your first home. So maybe we can step up as a community and care for our people who have been marginalized, and do that for people who have not had the opportunity for generational wealth at all. So that's one of the ideas that I have for practical solutions for reparations. The part of that would be part of the new NRP, and that's part of this economic justice that we need. Another thing that I think that we could do is land banking of naturally occurring affordable housing. We just heard about a lot of really good affordable housing projects that have been going up in North Minneapolis. We have had just so much development in South Minneapolis and very little of it in the way of affordable housing. So we've had a lot of displacement. And so one idea I have, after talking to experts in the nonprofit affordable housing world, who told me that there actually is money for buying and protecting and managing naturally occurring affordable housing, which they also say we have to protect at all costs, because in the state of Minnesota, we lose 4,000 units of naturally occurring affordable housing each year, and we only build in the entire state 1,000. So the chances that an affordable housing is going to come back in when something gets torn down is very small. So one of the ways that we can do that is to give a pot of money to the neighborhood so that they can participate in the market system. Because right now the market moves so quick that our nonprofit partners can't buy the houses, can't jump in fast enough. So if our neighborhoods have pots of money that they can buy a naturally occurring affordable housing building, land bank it, transfer that to the nonprofit organization when that funding comes through, and then you have a constantly renewing pot of money from a one-time investment from the city. So that's another thing that fits within this idea of economic justice. Universal basic income, or what some people call guaranteed basic income. I've been the first candidate in the city to talk about that. This is also something really important that impacts our marginalized communities. That is kind of reparations adjacent, I would say. We can be a leader, a city that leads in a pilot study for that, so that then we create a good database for this to happen at the national level. And finally, and I will stop talking here and let other people jump in, but the other thing that is really relevant, that has been a key part of my campaign, is that I believe that we must have precinct by precinct truth and reconciliation commissions. I lived in South Africa as a college student to learn about how South Africa transitioned from a brutal police apartheid state into a fully multiracial democracy, and how they kept themselves from falling into a civil war. And so I look at what's happening here. I've just been a mom in the wedge. But I looked around me and thought some of the things that I have studied and been devoted to my whole life, I didn't know would be really relevant in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 2020 or 2021, but they are. And this is one of those things. And so I want us to go precinct by precinct to talk about police violence, but also to talk about violence more generally, and also to talk really specifically about racialized brutality, but also reconciliation. And we're going to need to do that. You know, my background is in cultural studies. We're going to need to work with our partners, communities, community organizations. That's why it needs to be precinct by precinct. You know, we have a very diverse city. What healing looks like to Hmong community might be different than what healing looks like for a Somali American community. And so we're really going to need to do that work of learning about each other. And maybe we will find new ways of healing for ourselves too, and new things to be joyful and proud of, and really reposition ourselves as a city that is meeting the moment of the historical reckoning that is really what is going on in this entire country. But we have both the, the tragic, but also the positive opportunity that we are right at the heart of that reckoning. And I'm here to lead us and others and to collaborate to move us through and use the momentum of that reckoning.
Before we go, I want to invite Diana and Andrew and Dee to weigh in, particularly on the question of the value, the need, the opportunity for the NRP process. You all, like Alicia, are leaders in the neighborhood NRP, neighborhood renovation, revitalization program, neighborhood revitalization program. And so, Diana and Andrew, as the staff people, what are you hearing and what do you think about what Alicia is proposing?
Well, I can tell you, as somebody who works on all our housing programs, the issue that we run into in Hawthorne is we can't do anything for our renters with the money. So the thing that a lot of people have told us is that we work with these programs is NRP funds are for structures, not for people. So you can renovate a house, and then even there's limits. Like we have a lot of residents who come to us saying, well, I have a retaining wall that's fallen over. Do you have a loan for that? Well, we can't give out loans for retaining walls for some reason. That's part of the rules. Or signage, things like that. But for us, specifically in Hawthorne, where we are extensively, a renter neighborhood, we cannot give them money to help with their loan program or help with their rent out of NRP. We cannot give the tenant money to fix something that the landlord should fix. We cannot provide them with funds maybe so they can buy a portable air conditioner because the landlord hasn't installed air conditioning in the building. And so for us, obviously we love having our loans programs, and we've tried to turn it into Hawthorne, we've really decided we're not going to build ourselves out of a housing crisis, a single family home at a time. I don't understand why we are still subsidizing homes that will only help one family when we could build a triplex or a fourplex on that same piece of land and help 4 families. And subsidize it for a lot less. So we try to use our loan programs to get people to build a duplex or a triplex and make it forgivable if they are also a tenant of their own building. So a living landlord, because we don't want to see what happens and what other neighborhoods have experienced with NRP funding, where you provide it for down payment assistance or a construction loan to help build a new triplex, but that money is really benefiting somebody from outside the city or somebody from outside the neighborhood, and they're just going to start making money off of our community again, and that's not what we want. If, as of right now, NRP loans are only geared mostly towards private land ownership and private home ownership, well, we want to at least try and build wealth within the community by incentivizing people to live within the community, build a triplex or a fourplex, do get to know your residents of your building then, and as opposed to just thinking of them as an income source. But really what we'd love to see the program just be a lot easier for people to tap into. One thing, at least you were talking about $10,000. If you live in South Minneapolis, oftentimes how neighborhood loan programs, especially for reconstruction or renovations, are used as like that topping off money, where a resident has enough and they just need a little extra and they're able to qualify for that. In our community, $10,000 is not going to do much. People don't, one of our housing committee members pointed out when we were working on our program, let's research what it costs to get a furnace put in. Let's research what it costs to get a whole air conditioning system put in, because it's not for Hawthorne residents. It's not, I just need the extra money. It's, I need all the money. And so NRP, as it is right now, really does provide, ironically, most of its funds to people who are higher up income or middle class and white, because it does not provide enough funds for us to help people who aren't going to qualify for a bank loan or aren't going to be able to do emergency renovations unless they get all those funds. So I see how it definitely can be good, but it's just not there yet. And so that's something at Hawthorne. We've tried to find the loopholes. We've tried to work around the issues that are there now so that we benefit our neighborhood. But, I think Diana and Dee, you guys can talk a little bit more about that as well.
I'm going to come back to you, Diana. Let me go to Mickey first and come back to you and Dee on that one, because I don't want to leave Mickey more out. Mickey, good afternoon. Good to see you. Thank you for showing up every week. As I said, this is about creating a platform where you, the candidates, can present your position, your policies, and ask for the vote. So you've got the microphone.
Well, thanks for having me back, Al. Really quickly becoming my favorite part of the week, actually. So you can count on me for the foreseeable future. Let me just touch on the reparations issue quickly, because everybody's spoken on it, and I don't want to repeat what everybody has said, but I would encourage people to think about the idea of reparations, not in terms of individual kind of a repayment for wrongdoing, because like Ms. Gibson said, that's very messy. Who qualifies? How do you track it down? It's just a very complicated set of conditions to put that into place. But if people would think of this in terms of more of a concept of social reparations, how do we adjust our institutions that have so long been imbalanced in favor of the majority and causing this underserved community crisis, just like Andrew was talking about? How do we change the institution of the neighborhood revitalization program, whatever it's called now? When I was a kid, it was called the Neighborhood Improvement Program. Now it's called something else. How do we adjust those programs to target our underserved communities? How do we adjust the policies within our institutions, not just home ownership specifically, but our entire financial-based institutions? How do we allow them to more effectively target our underserved communities to really try to create a rebalancing of our society? And we have to do it throughout all of our institutions. We know the imbalance is so visible and so tangible within our healthcare institutions, within our educational institutions. Why are we always talking about in Minnesota how we have the worst education gap? Generation after generation, we allow it to continue without doing something about it. And those are the kind of social reparations that we could actually effectually manipulate and implement that then have the generational positive effects. We can begin to start to close this wealth gap. We can start to close our economic opportunity gap if we target economic development with the concept of social reparations at the heart of our effort. And we have to begin discussing it openly so that it can become a real and meaningful part of our policy, and not just a side note to kind of think about and wish on and dream about somehow in the future. Meanwhile, generation after generation continues to get left behind because we didn't put that idea in front. We need to start talking about the concept of social reparations as our structural foundation, our fundamental policy behind why we're even doing something. Because if we just continue with the same policies we've always said, all we're doing really is reinforcing the historical imbalance between our communities, and that's, that results in other problems. Within our criminal justice system, we need structural social reparations that go to the heart of why we are incarcerating one group of people at such a higher proportion than another group of people. So we have to have that at the forefront of our mind and our effort whenever we deal with these problems.
Diana, you were going to make a comment. Why don't you jump in, following up on Andrew's comments? And Dee, if you've got a comment, then I want to go back around to Victor and Jeremiah.
I just wanted to say I echo everything that Andrew is saying. I guess my main concern now is we have the evictions that people are getting ready to face. So how do we help these people? And most of those people are low-income people who do not have a job, who do not have anywhere to go, who do not know how they're going to. So how do we help those people? That's what my main concern is.
Dee, any comment you want to add to that? You're muted. She's saying no. Okay, we'll pass on you, Dee. Jump in when you want to. So, Victor and Jeremiah, why don't you respond to Diana's concern about the immediacy of evictions looming for people, and then on anything else we've talked about over the course of the hour. Victor, start with you.
Yeah, I've served on the NERC board for about 6-7 years, and every community organization could move these funds strategically. And I know over here what we've done in the past, we've been able to bring those funds to be able to create our first ever headquarters for NERC, which is Minneapolis' largest community organization. So this headquarters is meant to be helping people in the community, targeting young families, targeting livability issues. So there's ways to get creative with these funds to be able to get it. Obviously, NERC is bigger than most community organizations, so we have more money to work with. But you really need a lot of creativity to figure out how to be able to help those particular pockets of people in our community. I just wanted to say also, like, the fact that the incumbent had mentioned about despair and this thought of like, oh wow, we're talking about these terrible situations in our community. When I've been out here door knocking and talking to people about safety, you know what they tell me? People that have been around 30, 40 plus years, they say, Victor, we've been asking that since 1967. And Al, you've been here a while, and like we've been asking for safety for quite some time. So I made my platform real easy and real simple. Said, hey, how can we address these issues as best as possible? The reality is that there are cities in the country, specifically last year, that actually had zero increase in murders, that actually had less murders. So when we say, yeah, every city in America is dealing with spikes in crime, I mean, yes and no. Because there are some cities that are dealing with way better than we are. I mean, we had 80% jump in murders last year, when other cities, Newark had a 0% increase in murders. So there are cities that are doing it right, that are building consensus in the community, that are working with their law enforcement, that are working with changes in the community. And I think that in North Minneapolis, we need that here. Because again, how do we, when I go to the door and talk to people about, helping them with their homes or helping them with, the number one thing they keep telling me, and this is what I hear from people all the time, that's why I make it an issue. That's why I bring it up, because the constituents here in this ward, they continue to tell me, Victor, safety is number one. We feel like nobody's listening. I'm the candidate that's talking about safety a lot, and I'm being called a fear monger. Being called, are we talking about despair? Well, I'm just talking about what the people are telling me at the doors. People at the doors are worried about their safety. The people at the door are worried about their children. The people at the door is their number one concern, and we need to be able to work together. I don't believe in cancel culture and you did this, you did that. No, I believe in bringing people together. And right now, West Broadway, North Minneapolis is not together, and that's the number one thing I want to do in our community. We need to help. Why do the people of color, why do the most diverse part of our city have to deal with, it's okay to have this amount of crime. It's okay for kids to get shot. Some people in the community actually feel like this is normal. They tell us, hey, Victor, another person got shot in North. Well, you live there, you decided to live there. Like, some people are complacent that way, and I don't think that should be it. I think we need to bring the community together, all the pieces together, the city council member, the bid on the Broadway WBC, the police work together to really make sure that this is a safe community for the people of color that live here.
Jeremiah, you were actually born in North Minneapolis, I believe. So you've been here all of your life from infancy on. Is that the way it looks to you?
You know, North Minneapolis has always been the creative hub of the city from my vantage point, right? The most brilliant artists that I've ever seen, some of the most creative people that I've ever seen, they all come from North Minneapolis. There's a lot of resilience and there's a lot of ingenuity that comes out of this community. And as somebody who's born and raised here, you know, that's the story that I see. I was born in 1989, and it has been true that since 1989, North Minneapolis has carried the burden of violence in our city, right? That's been true since I've been born. And I would say that we have had plenty of candidates who have tried to address the violence Victor's way, increasing policing, punitive punishment, right? What we haven't had is someone who, and this is what I'm working towards, someone who can address people's sense of safety in three phases: prevention, response, and remedy. We have only ever had response. And it hasn't made us safer for 31 years. It hasn't made us safer. I think that what we need, and the national trends, I can cite my sources. The national trends are that homicides are up everywhere. And in 2021, they're not letting up. I can source that, right? And so my thing is, why don't we address the underlying causes? We started to do some of that work, but 31 years, and that's just my lifetime. 31 years of disinvestment and keeping people safe in the wrong ways. 31 years of staring at the problem, right? 31 years of maybe admiring the problem and getting to a point where you're willing to name it hasn't made us a safer community. But I think that stable housing, I think that people who live in the community, owning the commercial space as well, I think that people being able to be employed in their community, I think this is the direction that we need to go. And when we talk about safety in general, we have never made meaningful investments in violence prevention until, we just started the Office of Violence Prevention in 2018, and we're just now starting to make meaningful investments there, right? We've always had a policing-only response, but now we're starting to say we need a mental health response. We need a response for folks who are dealing with chemical addiction. We need a response to homelessness, because allowing a police-only response to manage situations like George Floyd is not acceptable for our folks anymore. And I talk to a lot of folks who are kind of amazed that something like George Floyd didn't happen on the North Side, because the experience with policing on the North Side has been similar to that, right? We exist in this paradox where people do not feel safe in their communities. They are dealing with the gunshots, the homicides, but they also don't. I talk to a lot of people who don't necessarily feel safe dialing 911 either. We have to make a system where people feel safe to call for emergency help when they are in an emergency. And if I've got neighbors that don't feel safe dialing that 911 number, I take that personally. I want to go fix that system. So that's what I'm working on. And then remedy, right? It is true that so many victims of violence, especially young victims of violence, if their goes unaddressed, if their concerns go unaddressed, or their safety go unaddressed, they turn into perpetrators of violence. We see that cycle happen, right? And so addressing the remedy, making sure that folks who are victims of violence can have their traumas addressed so that they don't then become perpetrators of violence. The remedy becomes a public safety issue as much as anything else, right? I think taking this approach, an approach that honors that people have agency, that people on the North Side have creativity, that we have so much to offer each other, instead of just appealing to, people's base instincts. Fear can be a motivator, right? And if I had, and if I have to go into this election and risk losing an election because I'm unwilling to tap into people's fears, and I want their choices to reflect their hopes instead of their fears, then I could live with that, because I think that the North Side deserves a lot more than this message of despair. And I think that the information tells us how to solve the problems. And if we listen to that, if we listen to the data, then we can get a handle on this crisis that we're in. We can make a safer community, and we can move in a different direction. And I want to clarify one thing too. You know, it's easy to work hard at on the election itself, right? I'm going to have to do that. Victor's going to have to do that. It's much harder to get into office and solve these problems. And when you're looking at the Commercial Property Development Fund, when you're looking at the Renter First policy, when you're looking at the creation of the Office of Violence Prevention, that's the hard work. I've been doing that work, and I don't think there's a person in this city, with all due respect to my colleagues who are on the council now, I don't think there's a person in this city who has demonstrated a willingness to work harder and to do more and to be as accessible as I have in the last 3.5 years.
Let me go around one time. We're almost out of time here, but I want to ask the candidates, starting with Alicia, then Mickey, then Victor, then Jeremiah, the incumbent, to take a minute to list for me and Brenda the 5 questions that each of your opponents must answer. And not so much your opponent, but that every candidate should address from your point of view. And these will be things that you are addressing, but put it in the form of a question that you think you want to give to residents so they can have a standard to measure responses of candidates by. So Alicia, are there 5 things you think everybody running in Ward 10 should be able to answer or report out?
Sure. Number 1, what do you think is the role of community in solving problems? I am one of the only candidates, as my thing is empowering community. So I want to bring everybody involved and want us to redo how we do engagement. The second is, how are we going to keep each other safe? Like Victor, almost every single person I talk to that's their main concern. Number 3, how are we going to create communities of care and battle systems of exploitation? Number 4, how are we going to address climate change for our children and for the young people that are inheriting a existential crisis? And number 5, what does leadership mean to you?
Great, thank you. Great questions. Mickey Moore.
Well, number 1 is how are you going to work to improve our public safety? What are you going to do as a member of the city council to improve the day-to-day personal safety of our residents and business owners? In Ward 9, that's the absolute most important question that everybody has. Number 2 is, how are you going to be a more responsive elected official? There's a tremendous disconnect between our city government and the residents of each community. They feel like they're not being heard, they're not being seen. Number 3 for Ward 9 is, what are you going to do to help revitalize our business districts and our commercial corridors? They've been decimated between the COVID-19 and the civil unrest. Ward 9 has lost its economic vitality. Number 4 is, how are you going to work to better our priorities as a city government towards issues like homelessness, housing, environmental justice? Our priorities have been skewed for decades, in some cases. We don't approach these issues properly. I'd like to know how each candidate is going to change the priorities of our city council. And maybe lastly, how are you going to work together? What experience do you have in your life that should lead our voters to think that you're going to work with the other 12 members of the city council and with the mayor to come up with better collaborative decisions and solution-oriented problem-solving policies and procedures that are, not the way things are operating right now. So how does your experience lead you to be a better team player?
Great questions. Victor, your turn.
I would echo number 1, trust between law enforcement and the community. I think that we need to ask that. Number 2 is that responsiveness to be able to respond back to the community. I know Ward 5 has a lot more issues than other wards sometimes, but to be able to get that response, I've heard that that's a problem in our ward. And then obviously revitalizing West Broadway. So I made those three things my campaign. We tried the same thing for 30 years. People in the community say, Victor, if we brought back beat officers to walk the beat and build relationship with people, that helps build trust. Number two, they say, hey, how do we keep accountable these officers that are not good in our system? Well, I support creating matrix systems to be able to identify trouble officers earlier on in their career rather than later. So I'm proposing that people are saying, yes, Victor, we like that. We're not a boss of police people here, and we're not defunders in Minneapolis. I've talked to 700 people, and I'm going to tell you, 95% of them are not defunders and not abolishers. The EMS, when I did it right along with them, Victor, whatever you do to police, you do to us. So when you bring down staffing levels for police, it's going to bring down response time for EMS because they won't come to most situations without a police presence. So I just want us to think about that. How do we rebuild trust so these systems work well together? And that's what I'm proposing and bringing to the north side.
So did you give me 5? 1 was trust, 2 was responsive, 3
Sure,
was
responsive. The business corridor.
Broadway. Okay.
At West Broadway, making it safe, making it clean. How are you going to go ahead and like the same thing they all said as well? How do you work together? You got people with different beliefs, different ideas. How do we bring together and find consensus?
Jeremiah, 5 questions. Unmute.
I think the first question folks should be able to answer is, what do you stand for? I think I'm the only candidate in my race who really has a platform. Second question is, how do you plan to make sure that people are safe in their community? How do you plan to prevent the next George Floyd, Jamar Clark from happening in our community? How do you plan to make housing stable, affordable, and dignified? And what is your plan to make commercial ownership possible for Northside residents? I think that if people can't get into the weeds, then that's a problem in North Minneapolis. We certainly have a lot of need, and we need studious people to work hard on our behalf. And I've been happy to be that for the last 3.5 years.
Listen, we're out of time. This is a good program, though. I've enjoyed the conversation. I invite each of you to come back every Monday. Brenda's writing the story. This will be a story that will appear in our newspaper. And our objective is to keep the conversation pot boiling. We want the community to feel like this is a place, a platform, an opportunity to really tap into those who are seeking to lead, seeking to serve. And I want to applaud and encourage all of you to continue on your path of service and leadership in our community. I'm Al McFarland. This is Conversations with Al McFarland. We'll see you next time.
Oh, Queen Justice, where are you? Did they beat you up or no? Lock you on the ground, take the crown away from you? Oh, Lady Liberty, red, white, and blue. Did they take your dignity with your bigotry? Teach you that you're born to lose. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you break. We've had enough of all the money you make. We've had enough, no more life at stake. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. It's been 400 years and we're 400 late. Together we stand from state to state. Going back in time won't make America great. We need justice now, people won't wait. Action, no more distraction. Every step we take, we gain traction. If it can happen to one, it can happen to all. United we stand, divided we fall. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. Better believe, roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules you were breaking. We've had enough of all the money you were making. We've had enough, no more life gets taken. We've had enough, this is a proclamation. Free or guilty, it's gonna get filthy. You better believe, just roll up your sleeves. It's gonna get rough, it's gonna be tough. We all agree, we've had enough. We've had enough of all the rules rules you're breaking. We got enough. All the money you're making. We got enough. Normal life gets taken. We got enough. This is the proclamation. We got enough. Trayvon Martin and Tommy Rice. We got enough. Michael Brown and Eric gonna pay the price. We got enough. Philando, Breonna, George Floyd. What? We got enough. So many gone. How can we fill the void? How can we fill? We got enough. Void. John Crawford, I know you've heard. We got enough. Sandra Bland, come on and take a stand. We got enough. Sean Bell, what the hell? We got enough. Freddie Gray, did you hear what I said? We got enough. This is a proclamation.
What's fun about working? Okay.
We are going live now.
I'm Al McFarland. Welcome to Conversations with Al McFarland. Today I continue in the December special series of conversations connecting with individuals, agencies, organizations, politicians, neighborhood people who have a common commitment to protect our communities, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. I reached out to the state of Minnesota, the Department of Health, and asked for their support in allowing Insight News and this program, Conversations with Al McFarland, to create a series of town halls where we engage leaders in community about the challenges they experience and the solutions that they are bringing from within the community to help our communities navigate towards health, sustainability, and in ways that mitigate the impact of the COVID-19 and other pandemics we face. So I'm pleased to have today Sharon Day, and Sharon Day is a phenomenal guest. She is the head of the Indigenous, let me get the right name here, I've got my notes, Indigenous Peoples Task Force. And I'm going to sort of read or paraphrase from my sheet here. Sharon M. Day is Executive Director of Indigenous Peoples Task Force. She's an Ojibwe, and she's enrolled in the Boy Fort Band of Ojibwe. She is a second degree MDiwan, and she'll explain what that is momentarily. She served as the executive director of the task force since 1990. She's also a grandmother, an artist, a musician, and a writer. She's one of the founders of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, which is formerly known as the American Indian AIDS Task Force. The Indigenous Peoples Task Force began as a volunteer organization in 1987 with all the work performed by the board of directors. In September of '88, the organization hired its first staff. Ms. Day was hired as the executive director in May 1990 and has served in that capacity since then. In 1998, the MDiwan were called, and correct me if I'm saying that wrong, I will get it right before we're done, Sharon. The MDiwan were called to help the Mendota Dakota people save a spring that is sacred to the Dakota. There was a road built 200 feet from the spring. The spring still flows. In 2003, when grandmother Josephine Mondamin walked Lake Superior, Sharon walked 2 days on the eastern shore near Lake Superior Provincial Park in Ontario. Since then, she has led 20 water walks, leading several each year. She is the editor of the anthology Sing, Whisper, Shout, Pray, Feminist Visions for a Just World, which is published by workbooks in 2000. She's written several plays for the Ikeda Acting Ensemble and Pangea World Theater. Some of her music is recorded on the CD entitled Nibi Walk River Songs. She has received numerous awards, including the Resourceful Women's Award, the Gisela Kanapka Award, BIHA's Women of Color Award, the National Native American AIDS Prevention Resource Center's Red Ribbon Award, the Alsta Banner Sabbatical Award, and the Spirit Aligned Legacy Fellowship for 3 years. She's been named as one of the 100 best loved women